My name is Tim Koczanski. I am with the Defense Standardization Program Office, and some of you may have been on yesterday and heard me talk about non-government standards and what we're working on in that space. I actually wear several hats in the office. The other hat that I wear is in regards to the DoD qualification program, and am responsible for the Qualified Products Database as well as the policy portions of our document, the DoD Manual 4120.24, Enclosure 14, the SD6, which is provisions governing qualification, and related parts of other policies such as anything that would be in DoD policy, the DFARS or FAR, and so on. So for those of you that had been to the last assist workshop that we had, this presentation is very similar. While we've made changes to the assist, generally the QPD has remained pretty stable. We haven't had many changes to it for quite a while. So this presentation will provide just an overview of some of the functions of the system itself. And then I'm also going to talk briefly about the Weapon Systems Impact Tool and some of the associated items that are available with WSIT. Bear in mind, WSIT is for government use only. Under the QPD portion, some of the screenshots that you'll see are either for the qualifying activities, some will be just basic search, and I will go through which is which from there. So with the assist, as many of you know, it is sort of the main access point for getting to a lot of the DSP documents. Within the assist, there is a link to the Qualified Products Database. I believe most of you were looking over the screens could see in the tabs on assist that there is a QPD link. So there is also a link on the Weapon Systems Impact Tool, and so on and so forth. So moving to the next slide. Before I go into the system itself, I did want to touch base on really what is qualification and why do we qualify. As stated here, qualification is a process of testing in advance of and independent of an acquisition, and it's specification driven, and it's always stated in Section 3. The reason why we test in advance is for various reasons, and these reasons come from FAR 9.2 in Federal Acquisition Regulation, and they are because the testing labs are not readily available, the testing equipment may not be readily available, the items could be designated as safety critical in the Federal Logistics Information System, it could be for life-saving and emergency equipment, or the testing time that it takes is so long that we would never ever be able to have availability of product because we would never ever fully complete testing cycles. So when we talk about qualification, this isn't a requirement that you could implement on every spec you wanted. There are specific reasons and justifications that are required in order to have qualified sources. And every qualifying activity that makes the determination on a spec that there needs to be qualification testing has to get it approved at a very high level because of the fact that it's in regulation and there are specific rules that go along with it. Once the specification is approved for qualification, obviously the vendors that have interest that are notified, and anybody can qualify, those that pass are put on the appropriate qualified products list if we're qualifying products, or if we're qualifying processes and materials, they'd be put on a qualified manufacturers list. The QPD obviously tracks both those items, whether it's a QPL or a QML. So really the functions that we derive from qualification are shorter lead time because, again, if we're dealing with excessively long tests, we're cutting that down by doing qualification testing. We are able to reduce the test costs with qualification because generally the qualified sources have three ways to maintain their qualification once they're tested. It can either be the manufacturer can self-certify, they can, the qualifying activity can request test data, or, you know, if there have been problems with products or there have been issues noted, they can go ahead and request full-blown qualification testing. Obviously, this keeps qualified sources in very good stead on the QPL or QML, and keeps the system and the qualification programs generally very robust. So there's a little bit of history with how we got to where we currently are. Prior to 2006, we had a paper-based QPL system in which the QPLs were PDF documents. They were static, and what we were noticing was they were out of date. And one of the issues with having a paper-based system when you're dealing with the qualification, QPL, QML documents, is it was very much a heavy labor burden on the qualifying activities to be able to manage and update their documents as necessary. They had to do searches within the ASSIST database, pulling documents, reviewing, and really what was determined by the DSPO, by our office early on, and this is in the early to mid 1990s, was, is there a way to bring qualification more into the 21st century, because we were working from the 20th century, and can we create less of a burden on the qualifying activities? Can we create, I guess the term would be today, a smart system that would remind qualifying activities when documents were due, or help them port in information such as supplier information, or be able to run reports to see, you know, where the status of their program per their given preparing activity or qualifying activity was at any given point. And that was really the genesis of creating this system. We wanted to find a way that was an easy way to manage the program without having to add additional burdens in an environment where we're all having to do more with less. So the system itself started in development in the 2000s. I came on board when we were well underway with actually creating the system. However, the system went live in 2006. NAVC was the first activity that went ahead and loaded, I believe it was 6 QPLs into the system. And all while we were developing the system, we had stakeholder feedback and allowed for groups to try and use the system to kind of make it better. So the electric system did go live in 2006, and as I've stated earlier, it tracked retention of qualification, and the database itself is specification driven. Because the requirement for qualification comes from the specification, it's not a QPL in and of itself. Within our system, the specification has to be linked to the QPL has to be linked to a specification in ASSIST. We also wanted to allow for data to be brought in also to ease the burden off of the qualifying activities, and we did that by originally porting data from the Central Contractor Registry, which is a registry of the cage codes and the addresses of manufacturers that do business with the government. I guess about 10 years ago, CCR, the Central Contractor Registry, as well as a bunch of other government systems in terms of procurement, was merged into GSA's System for Award Management, SAM. So our data in terms of the qualified sources, both their corporate addresses as well as any plants, are tracked through SAM, and we port that information in nightly. And one of the benefits of doing that, it allows qualifying activities the ability to manage their QPLs and QMLs in a workflow system in near real time, and we're not dealing with having old or out-of-date data on paper static documents. The image on the right side of the screen is a screenshot from the Qualified Products Database. If you look right below where it says Qualified Products Database, in that image, you'll see a tab list that has everything from main, search, manage data, global update, import, export, help. And one of the things about QPD is this is a role-based system. So depending on your user roles, what you see could be everything that I have in my personal account. You could be just a person who does searches, and you would only see main, search, PDF download, and help. And I'll get into more of the roles as we go further on. The way the system is set up, it does give the qualifying activity, which is the pretty much equivalent of a preparing activity in most cases. In this particular example, Naval Sea Systems Command is the qualifying activity. It will give you the federal supply class. I had done a search on a specific QPL, 960. It gives you the QPL number. And then the next box over is it will give you a hyperlink to the governing specification. It gives you the doc date that it was originally created and what the doc status of that document is, the title, and in the QPL notes all the way to the far right, preamble is the information that you used to see as the header in the paper QPLs, which said something to the effect of, this QPL is approved for use by the Department of Defense. The qualifying activity for this document is Naval Sea Systems Command, their addresses, and so on and so forth. That's where you can find that. And then the qualifying activity has the ability also to put any footnotes that may be pertinent to this particular QPL. And then towards the bottom, you'll see that there are two government designations for this QPL. And by government designations, we mean government part number. One is inactive because there is no hyperlink. There are no sources for it. And then the second is inactive, that you can actually click the link to find out, well, who is available to purchase from for these items. So a little more background on the Qualified Products Database. Similar to what Dan was talking about with some of the modules in Assist, in this case, with QPD, NAVC is only able to see the QPLs or manage the QPLs for NAVC. They won't see NAVAIR. They won't see the Ordnance Center at Indian Head, and so on and so forth. Currently in the system, there are 718 QPLs covering over 13 million manufacturers' part numbers. That number changes, so it could be a little more, it could be a little less within maybe 5 or 6 within the system. Bear in mind that it is a near real-time system, so as QPLs get canceled or new QPLs get in, those numbers do change. We have 49 qualifying activity administrators, which from the service and agency side is the highest role. We have 69 qualifying activity personnel. We have folks that can do many of the same roles as the qualifying activity administrator. However, they can't assign roles within the system for their respective service. We have 64 data entry personnel, and in FY19, the system had almost 8 million hits. So it is widely used. Back to the image on the right, we've done a deep dive now into the QPL itself. I have clicked on the hyperlink for the government designation for Type 2. And when you click on a designation, as a way to remind you of where you are in the system, it will highlight. It also gives you the option, if you notice there's a printer on the left side of that government designation, in which you could print the sources that you currently have for that designation. I'd like to make a general broad statement that these screenshots were pulled a while back. So what's showing in this particular QPL is not a current representation of what may be there now. But I use this because I'd like to highlight the traffic lights that are on the right side of that image. The traffic lights are important because qualification generally is always needing to be within certification limits, whatever they may be assigned by the qualifying activity, and that stoplight denotes what the certification status of those products are or those suppliers are. When the light is green, the product is currently within its certification requirements. If the traffic light is yellow, that means that certification is going to come due, and that light is to both be a note to the manufacturer as well as to the qualifying activity that their certification will be coming due. And then when the light is red, it means they are past certification, which means that certification has expired. And that could mean many things. It could mean that the organization, the company, was late in sending their DD 1718 form. It could mean that the form has been received, however, the system, has not updated yet. And as I said, it's in near real time, so there can be a lag. Whenever anybody sees a red light, and we provide this if you were to hover over with your mouse, it does not state that you can't buy from them. It states you need to contact the qualifying activity for more information, because there could be many, many different circumstances that any of our government buyers would need to know about, such as, no, we received their paperwork this morning, we're waiting for the system to update, and they can either be purchased from, or maybe, nope, they can't. So that's the information provided generally by the search function. And most people will see something to the similar effect. So the other point I'd like to make is when you choose a specific manufacturer designation, it will highlight the company that you've chosen. In this case, I chose Emerson Automation Solutions. They have several designations for this particular QPL. And when I do that, one of the things you'll notice on the left side is I now have the point of contact for that company that I need regarding this qualification. So that can be very helpful. To the right of the screen, within the highlighted portion, the far right column, there is a link. Again, if there are any other source point of contacts you can click on, that will come up. Also, if there are additional plants that fall under this organization, you can click on that and get those plant addresses as well as point of contacts. So in terms of the operation of the system, there are several things you have to have when putting in from a a qualifying activity or a qualifying management activity. One, you have to have a spec in the assist that is designated as having a QPL requirement before you can build the shell of a QPL within the QPD. All of those data set links, if you noticed early on in my presentation, do go back and bring a hyperlink up to the initial governing specification. There is a flag that our folks up at the DSPO mark on the document when there is a qualification requirement, so that relationship between the qualified products database and the assist link together, and that the qualifying activity can go ahead and build a shell within the QPD. When qualification is canceled, the verification is returned to a different type of verification, whether it's first article testing, statistical process control, sampling, whatever that might be. The QPD record can be deleted, and the same goes for the plants. You can also just cancel it, and if it's canceled, it will partition so it's not seen. And this can be done if you're not sure if the QPL will be reactivated at some point. Now, bear in mind, you know, if you cancel a QPL and you decide to reinstate the QPL, you're going to have to talk about looking into what justifications may be needed, and you're going to have to look back at possibly re-auditing all those suppliers that you once had. So it's not just as easy as flipping a switch. Obviously, there are different situations for different cases, but bear that in mind. And then the addresses of all the qualified sources are provided by cage codes. So any supplier that gets added in needs to have a cage code. If they have a separate plant where they're making product in, they need to have a cage code for that plant as well. Remember, because qualification is all about traceability back to the original equipment manufacturer, where it was made, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this screen is switching more to the management side of the QPL for my qualifying activities. Many of you are familiar. If you need to make changes into the system, you would use the Manage Data tab, and it's pretty much menu driven to allow for however you want to either add a new document, you can make edits, you can add check marks for critical safety items, and so on and so forth. In this particular example, I chose to maintain an existing qualified product list. I typed in MILT 960, which was the example we were using. And you can see that the menu allows for, if they were initially setting up the QPL, it allows for the qualifying activity to add the information as necessary. There's a drop down depending on who the product is assigned to, who they need to mark as the qualifying activity, the document governing version, whether it's active, inactive, so on and so forth. And again, it allows them to put their recertification duration in months, their retest duration in months, and their notifications in how many months they want to be received. And again, this goes back to the fact, as we were talking about the burden that was placed by managing paper documents, this allowed the system to be able to alert the qualifying activity, to be able to know when they needed to make changes or handle any sort of updates to their documents. Again, in the Manage Data screen, this is where you have the qualifying activities have the ability to publish information or change any information, and that includes government designations. If there are NSNs that they want to add to the QPL, that can be done here. Spec sheets, whether or not the item is critical safety, and then whether or not they want to delete or add parts or put any notes in. and most importantly, publish that information once they're completed to ensure that it shows up in QPD. Again, more screenshots of if you wanted to add in another type or series. And as I said earlier on in my presentation, access to what you actually see in QPD is role-based. Obviously, we have super users such as our developers, folks at Northrop that were there from the beginning when we designed the system. They are universal administrator accounts, and they have access to all the data. DSPO users, of which I'm one, have pretty much the same super user capabilities and can see access to all of the QPLs within the system from all the qualifying activities. When it comes down from the DSPO on down, that's where the data starts to get limited. For the DSPO can see all of the qualifying activities within their service, and it's read-only. They do not have the ability to make any changes. They can only see, in the example of Navy, NAVC, the Ordnance Center at Indian Head, and NAVAIR. DLA obviously can see, Richmond, Columbus, and Philadelphia. So IS, CC, and all the GS codes for Richmond. With the QA admin, I touched on that earlier. The QA admin pretty much is the super user for their specific qualifying activity code, AS. They have the ability to publish the QPL. They have the ability to make any changes. And the one standout that the QA admin has that the QA does not have is the QA admin is the one person assigned in that qualifying activity that has the ability to determine the roles of the people underneath them, who can be a QA, who is a data entry person, who is a cognizant engineer, and so on and so forth. The QA manages the qualification program for an activity. They have full privileges for QPL access and historical data. They are able to publish. The cognizant engineer, it's similar to the QA, but for specific QPLs that fall under their purview, they do not have the ability to publish. And then we have a lot of folks that are data entry that are there to enter in the government part numbers, the manufacturer's part numbers, any NSN data, and so on and so forth for a given QPL. We also do have two modules that allow one for XML downloads to files. Some of the qualifying activities like to have that information. We do not have in the system an XML file for the entire system, like as in one system master file. We only have XML files for each individual QPL. And we also have an import-export capability, which allows the qualifying activity for extremely large files to be able to export the data out of QPD to make changes in a spreadsheet format, and then go ahead and import it back in. And this, of course, is to avoid any sort of fat fingering mistakes that could be made when entering in a significant amount of parts data, part numbers, and so on and so forth. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to go ahead and switch gears and move over to the Weapon Systems Impact Tool, WSIT. Probably about 15 years ago, we looked to develop a system that would answer the question, what would happen if I make a change to this specification and standard? What is the effect of that change, or where can I see what the effect may be? And really what the Weapon Systems Impact Tool does is it allows users to trace the use of standards and specification by both weapon system and parts. So if I were to make a change to, say, 85049, SAE AS 85049, what would be the effect that my change might have? What are the weapon systems that would be impacted? What are the parts that we're talking about that may be impacted, and so on and so forth? And it was really designed to be a tool for the standardization management community to look in at the impact that not only the specs and standards that their folks are working on would have, but also when justifying things like budgets for what kind of projects they're moving forward with, and where funding might be needed. It was a good way to go in and say, you know, we have these standardization documents that need updating. We need to budget for this, and these documents, oh, by the way, support these weapon systems. With that, WSIT also works directly with another system that I'll get into called Pinpoint. And Pinpoint, where WSIT looks at the impact on specs and standards would have on parts, Pinpoint looks at the parts side of that equation. And both Pinpoint and WSIT work in concert. Pinpoint obviously offers users access to structured data on government-approved parts that are used across the supply chain. Caveat here, the WSIT and Pinpoint databases both are government only. So I'll put that out there. So one of the things that's necessary in order to access both systems is going to be a CAT card. And the link to WSIT can be accessed through Assist. There is a tab. And really what WSIT does is it relates specs and standards to NSN and weapon system data. It again shows what specs can be important in a given area. It also links directly from Assist. And it also can show what NSNs are good candidates for supply chain evaluation efforts. Pinpoint works a little bit more as a query engine for researching parts in the federal supply chain. It was originally designed to meet the objectives of MIL Standard 3018, which is the parts management standard. And there's a proprietary search engine that's used by both these systems that aggregates part data from various databases, part portals, and commercial manufacturing websites, and really uses AI in order to extract and infer part properties from the text that it finds in these descriptions, part numbers, so on and so forth. So as I said, you can access the WSIT through Assist. This is obviously the Assist main page on the search side. And if you'll notice, there is a tab for WSIT right next to the tab for QPD. Our users would click on that, and they would have to authenticate. It would ask for your certificate in order to gain access. Once you click through, it brings you to the Weapon Systems Impact Tool landing page. This particular page allows you to search by national stock number, by specification document, or if you know, weapon system designator codes. In this particular example, I searched by a specification document, MIL-PERF 19500. And I would go ahead, enter my search parameter in, and click Search WSIT. Okay, so what we get when we do a search is two-part, actually. The first part that you're seeing here is a graphical representation of, for that MIL-PERF 19500, the weapon systems by service are shown on the left side of the pie chart, and on the right side, the weapon system types. Now, it's only good with the data that it gets. So on this, it shows mainly aircraft. There may be others that are listed. There is a legend below that would list what type of data it would be. A couple of other things that you'll notice is above the two graphical representations, you can see the weapon systems and the number that are affected. It also shows in parens the national stock numbers, and it gives you the ability to download a report with that information. And below what we just saw, this is the second half of the page, it starts listing the weapon system designator codes, the weapon system descriptions, the NSN references, and if there are any QPD references. And as you can see from the first line, there's a weapon system designator code, which you can click on, and it will tell you what the weapon system is. There is the description, the number of NSN references, and the number of QPD references. All those are hot linked, so you can click on them and be brought, as is with the case with the NSN references, to pinpoint to see those items. This is doing a search on national stock numbers for 19500. I went ahead, I still have the same information in the search criteria, but instead of hitting weapon system tab, I hit the national stock number tab. Now it says on the national stock number that there are 4,957 parts. The graphical representations show the federal supply classes that these parts fall into and the top 10 item name codes. The bottom part of that screen then gives me a full list of national stock numbers, the item name, whether they're active, and the number of reference is from the weapon system designator code. And again, these items are hyperlinked. So if I wanted to pull, say, a transistor or a semiconductor device diode, I can go ahead and put that number, that NSN or NIN, into search criteria, and it will go ahead and list the part number from the manufacturer, the cage code of the manufacturer, and the name of the manufacturer as well. So it's a really good tool for those that are interested in understanding, well, if I make a change to the spec or standard, what is it likely to affect? So from our standardization management activities, it's a nice tool, but also to those in DoD that are item managers or parts managers, you know, if I'm looking for parts for a system, if the part that I was using is no longer available, are there parts with similar characteristics? These are things that can be answered by this system. I will put a note out there that we do run WSIT training sessions from time to time. I'm sure we'll have one coming up. And if interested, you can either reach out to me or keep track on our website, because we do, when we run those training sessions, do put them in advance, and most of them, obviously, in the current environment will be done virtually. Also, if there are any questions, you know, we can certainly take those as well. Just as a quick tie up to this section, one of the things we were able to see with 19500 was it was used on 994 different weapon systems. It has 4,957 different national stock numbers associated with it. And again, we talked about, you know, the pertinence of this type of data could be both to item managers, parts managers, and the standardization management community.